Hi everyone, my name is Harriet Thomson and today I'm going to be talking to you about energy poverty and energy vulnerability. So I first need to go back 5 decades to the 1970s, during which time there was a global oil crisis which made the price of domestic energy really expensive. And this led British government officials to coining the term fuel poverty, which was later developed by Brenda Boardman in her groundbreaking book of the time. And now in the present day, the issue is widely studied across Europe and is more commonly referred to as energy poverty. So energy poverty is an important policy issue because it creates wide-ranging impacts, both direct and indirect. For instance, it can lead to households underheating their homes during winter, being too hot during the summer, and not being able to pay their energy bills. This in turn can lead to poorer mental and physical health, to local air pollution issues, as well as issues at the business and governmental levels. So, for example, if a significant proportion of the population stopped paying for their energy, this would create cash flow issues for utility companies. So overall, addressing energy poverty, particularly through energy efficiency and renewable energy, creates lots of win-win situations for other policy areas. It can improve population health, it can reduce air pollution, and it can lessen political tensions. The early European framing of energy poverty was very technical, and it focused on 3 factors. So firstly, how energy inefficient your home and the equipment contained within it was, the price of energy, and how much money, the overall household income that a family received. And this was important for emphasising the role of infrastructure and distinguishing it from income poverty. So it means that increasing someone's income will only address the issue in the short term. It will not resolve the underlying issues of poor quality housing and/or high energy prices. However, measuring energy poverty is a really challenging task. It's a private condition that's confined to the home, and we wouldn't necessarily know what an energy poor household looks like from walking down the street. It varies over time and space. It's incredibly culturally sensitive. So energy usage norms are socially constructed. So what kind of services people are expected to have at home. And overall, it's just a really complex, multidimensional phenomenon. But overall, there are 3 main approaches that we could take. So firstly, we could look at patterns of energy expenditure. We might look at actual energy bills and how much people are paying at the end of the month, or we could try and estimate what their sort of required expenditure might be using complex building models. Next, we could simply ask people, using the self-reported approach, do you have heating? Do you have air conditioning? Are you able to keep your home adequately warm or cool? And lastly, we could try and directly measure things like indoor temperature, the amount of lighting in the home, things like that. This approach has been the least used, and it's also the most complicated. So measuring indoor temperatures is notoriously difficult, and it also creates some ethical concerns around the amount that you're monitoring people and whether they're kind of in the home at any point in time or if they're out. In policy terms, a small number of European countries have been working to address energy poverty for a number of years now. And the most well-known and the longest-standing definition was the UK's 10% definition, which was in use for several decades up until 2013. And this classified households as energy poor if they spent more than 10% of their income on their energy costs. However, it was widely criticised for including richer households as energy poor, including our very own Queen. And I think we can all agree that she's definitely not poor, as she's one of the richest people in the country. So in 2013, the government said, we want a new definition, and it commissioned an academic, John Hills, to go about doing this. And so he came up with the new low-income, high-cost measure. Although I should note that the rest of the UK still uses a 10% definition, so we have a little bit of policy divergence there. In Ireland, France, and Slovakia, They also have definitions of fuel poverty and energy poverty. But at the European level, there's no shared definition, despite many attempts to establish one. However, it is an issue that is being taken more seriously by the European Commission, by individual member states. And there's a lot more action and policy measures in place to try and address the problem. But there are many gaps in the ways that energy poverty is measured and governed at present. And as part of a project I managed for the European Commission, I hired an agency to put together a photo exhibition, sort of to look at portraits of people who are affected by energy poverty issues. And through this exhibition, we wanted to challenge existing misconceptions that exist about the issue. And this was based on conversations with policymakers in different countries, as well as with other researchers as well. So our exhibition covered 4 countries, including the area around Jokkmokk in northern Sweden, where there are small and remote villages scattered around are very vulnerable to failure in the energy infrastructure. So many of the power lines up there are old and quite frail, as you can see in this picture here. And in one village that was visited as part of this exhibition, in December alone, they had 35 power outages. In just 1 month, 35 outages. There are also wider issues with the way that indigenous Sami people were forced to move from their lands to make way for hydroelectric infrastructure. So this really sort of challenged a lot of preconceptions about Northern Europe. We also met people living in Budapest in Hungary who face unbearably hot summer conditions. So one family we met lives in a high-rise concrete tower block, which has no natural shading, and it often exceeds 30 degrees Celsius internally in the hotter months, sometimes reaching around 40 degrees. And the family shown here, they spend every moment just trying to avoid the heat and trying not to use any electrical equipment and not to have lights on, just so that they avoid adding to that heat inside. And so recognising these gaps, the theoretical framing and academic discourse on energy poverty has really evolved over the last decade, with vulnerability thinking and discussions of energy services used to challenge the narrowness of those 3 drivers that I discussed earlier that are prevalent in earlier energy poverty work. And from this body of work, we know that energy poverty is a complex, multifaceted issue that occurs when a household is unable to secure materially and socially necessitated levels of energy services in the home. Researchers emphasise the importance of talking about energy services, and this is because people do not demand energy per se. They don't demand 5 kilos of wood or 100 kilowatt hours of electricity. Instead, we want the useful service that energy provides, such as showering, cooking, heating. And this is a socio-technical term, meaning that it cannot be understood in purely technical or social terms alone, recognising that there are different factors that contribute to the provision of energy services, including technologies, the wider institutional and policy arrangements within a particular country, as well as individual consumer needs. So applying the concept of energy vulnerability means examining the risk factors that contribute to the precariousness of particular spaces and groups of people, whereas the term energy poverty can be seen as more static, as a descriptor of a fixed state. So an energy vulnerability framework captures temporal dynamics, with households who are described as energy poor at a given point in time able to exit the condition in the future by changing some of their circumstances, and vice versa, they may fall back into energy poverty later on. And so using this framework developed by my former colleagues Stefan Bazarowski and Saskia Petrova, we move away from studying the traditional triad of fuel poverty drivers and instead look at 6 key factors outlined here. So this includes things like the type of energy carriers that you have available to you, what you have access to. So are you able to use mains gas and electricity, or are you reliant on bottled gas? Do you have a district heating network? All these kind of different questions around the types of energy we have. Things like flexibility. Are you able to make changes to the quality of your housing? Are you able to install a solar panel on the roof? And if you're a tenant, then the answer is probably no. And so this increases your vulnerability to experiencing energy poverty. And the last two on there, needs and practices. These are really developed, under-researched aspects of energy poverty. So we really need to look at what an individual household requires. So if somebody has a disability that means they need high indoor temperatures to maintain good health, then their energy consumption is likely to be higher than, say, a healthy young male living alone. These are the sort of factors we look at there. And lastly, practices, by which we mean your behaviours in the home, but it can also be used to understand your kind of energy literacy, so how much you know and understand about the energy systems within your own home, and whether you're able to take advantage of different energy schemes that are available to you. And the reason that this shift to energy vulnerability is important is that it fits more cases, and it includes people who would otherwise go unnoticed and fall between the cracks of traditional approaches to understanding energy poverty. For example, returning back to northern Sweden, people in Jokkmokk are used to energy being unreliable, and so many of them have emergency kits prepared in their houses. These can be diesel generators, canned tins of food, candles, etc. And Margareta and Lars, shown here, they're reindeer herders. And last year, they were without electricity for weeks. So all of the reindeer meat in their freezers spoiled, which had serious economic impacts for their business. So even though these people live in nice, comfortable houses in one of the most equal countries in the world, this is energy poverty too. So thank you very much for listening to my talk today, and please do stay in contact. Send me an email if you have any questions, and I'm also on Twitter. So thanks again for your time.